didn't see any hint of democracy because the fact that he too was inclined towards authoritarian rule. He didn't become an authoritarian ruler. He didn't have the chance because he was murdered, assassinated in 1951. But as long as he lived, there was this feeling among people, and of course, in the later course of history, we have conclusive evidence of that. If you recall, in 1948. 25th February to be exact, we had our own Bengali lawmaker, Dhirendranath Dutta. He stood up in the Pakistan Constituent Assembly asking for the right to use Bengali, the Bengali language in the Pakistan Constituent Assembly. And Mr. Liaquat Ali Khan's response was that it was a conspiracy to divide Pakistan, to break up Pakistan. So this idea of conspiracy in Pakistan, it began from there. So we went through all these phases. We're all aware of those phases. It took Pakistan, you see, when we talk of constitutional history, it took Pakistan 9 years to frame a constitution in 1956. And even that was a flawed constitution, although Mr. Hussain, the very revered Hussain Shaikh Surwadi, he pointed out, he told Bengalis that 98% autonomy had been given to Bengalis. That was not the case at all, because what happened was East Pakistan was put on a par. I'm saying we talk throughout the 1950s and 1960s, Bengalis were asking for parity in government services, in the civil service, in the armed forces, in everywhere else, in industry. But the kind of parity that we were given in 1956 was parity that we did not want. All these four provinces of West Pakistan were lumped together to form West Pakistan, and what happened was the majority of the population, 56% of the Bengalis were equated with 44% of West Pakistanis. That was the kind of parity that we were given, and that naturally would lead to disaster. But then we had the feeling that the Constitution, despite all these weaknesses in it, the Constitution would work out well. It didn't, because with the 2 years, Ayub Khan took over, Iskandar Mirza and Ayub Khan took over, and of course, on their team was a very bright young man who would later prove to be the main instrument in the breakup of Pakistan, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. Now, so I'll digress a little bit about Bhutto.
Public figure to the nation and not insist on one's privately motivated right and claim to rule. Perhaps Dr. Kamal Hussain, an eminent jurist and the chairman of the Bangladesh First Constitutional Drafting Committee in 1972, who has graced this occasion, can share his thoughts on these aspects of the books or any other issues that he deems important. With these few words, today I would like to invite the esteemed panelists to the dais. May I kindly invite, first of all, Mr. Syed Badrul Hasan, Associate Editor, Asian Age, and author of various books, including From Rebel to Founding Father, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, on the dais, please.
Your tenure. So, these are the things we need to engage about. This, I think, it's getting people organized to become conscious of the fact that it is through the vote in the electoral process that they exercise control over the state. I mean, it's very fundamental. I want to go to fundamentals and not to, sophisticated notions that you have dealt with very, very well, with all the literature and so on. But take it down to its bare bones. What are we saying? The 160 million people, half of them say are voters, 50%. How are they to secure their control over the state? And rightly, what we have done, and what would be the total membership of each party? 1 million, 10 million, sir. Is that, suppose for them polarization is very important. And this polarization is, we are the real patriots. They are agents of so and so. They are agents of X country, the other side will say they are agents of Y country. I mean, this is disgraceful that you question your opponents on the basis of their extraterritorial loyalty. My point is, our ordinary people are tremendously, are capable of understanding. If you take the trouble to go and make them, put these facts to them, put these choices to them, and then see whether they can make the right choice. Now, I say this, my confidence comes from the 70 elections. That one, we had 5 lakhs and the other people had 5 crores. And I said, we are confident we will win because we will go from door to door. And I had with me about 200 students, boys and girls. And I said, look, we will have to go to every house individually. So from 6 in the morning till about 10 at night, we went from street to street, house to house. And we'll be invited in and we say, look, why are we here? We are here because this election is a life and death matter. And so Bhutto's idea that you can sort of swing the vote by their method, and they have sent so much money. You tell them, look, they have sent so much money. I have only 5 lakhs. No way in which I can give you money or offer you money. But you must understand that your future, your children's future, depends on whether you can vote the right people in. We are standing for those who say we will not allow what has been going on to continue. You can make a difference. You can on voters day, you will go.
Elections are not such a hassle anywhere else. Why is it such a troublesome thing in Bangladesh? That question I kept asking to myself, and I do not know why I thought about doing a PhD on that. I approached Professor Wanamensky and I said I'd like to know more constitutionally about it, as to I think no holistic study about the caretaker regime was done at that time when I started in 2007. I think Mr. Nizam Ahmed did some. He analyzed 3 caretakers. So I thought that I would give it with the full caretaker regime, not sort of include everything. But as I started, the journey became much more complicated because in the middle of my thesis, the CTG was scrapped off. So when I came for my fieldwork in 2011, nobody wanted to give me the interview because it was a very steamy topic. So what happened is I went to the political parties and before I started the PhD back in 2007, just the summer of 2007, I think, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina was in London. So in one of the social gatherings that I met her and I said, I'm about to do a PhD on the caretaker government, and she stopped everybody and she took 20 minutes to speak to me, to say, oh, I'm for it, this is something that I believe in, you must listen to me, and you must, when you interview in Bangladesh, you must take my interview. So I held on to those words, and 2007 happened, 2008 happened, 2009 happened, 10 happened, 11 happened, and the CTG was gone. So when I came here in the summer of 2011, CTG was just scrapped off. So I tried, and Prime Minister was Prime Minister. So I tried to take her interview, and I could not. I was not allowed anywhere near. But I kept saying that, well, she told me to interview her, and I can't, I'm quoting her, but nobody believed me. So then I went to the leader of the opposition, and I said, ma'am, what are your views about it? Would you share it? After a lot of convincing, she said, what are the questions are you going to ask me? Are you going to frame me? Are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? I said, no, ma'am, here are the questions. And would you be kind enough to give me your interview? She said, yes, Sunday, such and such time. So that was 4 days. On Sunday morning, I had a call from her office to say that she's declined because her advisors thought that it was inappropriate for her to give the interview. So since then, I tried the political parties, but nobody would comment. So my journey became even more difficult. But I had to conclude the thesis. I invested toil, money, energy, and I thought that why not? Professor Minsky said that, no, why don't you do a proper analysis of the whole thing? Whatever you think, it will stay for record, because it's a new concept. Emerging democracies in Africa, emerging democracies anywhere, could actually take notes from this, could take lessons from it. So why don't you record it for the purposes of recording and have your PhD done? It will be illegal. It was difficult to make it a legal PhD because it could have been as well from the political science department, but it wasn't because of this chapter 2, which was so hard. But so that's how I started it. I took a 2 years break in between because to gather funds. My son was very ill.
We were convinced that that's right. I was myself convinced that there was going to be no concession by the across the table. I mean, we in a way were mentally prepared for what happened when we were saying that this will be negotiated. There will be a constitution which will be negotiated, through which disparities could be corrected, allocations could become more equitable. The institutions involved with this, finance ministry, the planning commission, the central bank, all of these would be restructured in a way that the disparity that had been generated over 24 years would begin to be corrected, to redistribute power. I mean, we understood it and we thought that across the table there would be no answer to this. When he said, how can you justify this kind of pattern of disparity? And how can you deny that this is structurally created, and therefore it has to be structurally corrected? But there was no interest in negotiating, there was no interest in engaging. And the realization, and we were, could, and this was proved, we were proved right. When we came back and reported, we said there will be no negotiation. How allocations are made, how the resources are distributed, and when you show, how can you justify that 56% of the people get only 30% of the resources? What happened to the other 26%? And the natural claim that you then make is compensate over the next few years. I mean, not in one go, but so they said, what's in it for us? What's in it for United Pakistan if we have to compensate these people? Either we have a subservient sort of system in which the central government's diktat will prevail, or else let them go. I mean, I actually heard this from, friends at the center who are part of their ruling elite. That why you people insist so much, we let you go, why should we carry you on our backs? Why should we suffer? Why should we have to compensate you? Now this is, you see, at that time, there was not enough time for this to be put across to the people with the United with the March. What he did not understand, and what I think, that's a lot,
is changed. Politicization of administration, including law enforcement agencies, are not stopped. The positioning of the BEC's proper constitution under a well-defined law is not made, and an action-oriented, well-defined security system is not put in place, Bangladesh would not and cannot have effective electoral system functioning, even though all elements of good, free, fair, to conduct a free, fair election is there. Therefore, whether it is caretaker government or whether it is political government, unless these elements exist, it's very difficult if you put anybody in the election commission or anybody in the administration to give you a free, fair, and credible election. I can congratulate her for writing such book, and it will be a reference. And many aspects of this book may be further researched by other researchers. Thank you once again for inviting me. Thank you very much. I was not very satisfied. And I put the question that why the election commission would not enforce the law that it had in its own hand. That proves that even election commission placed by the caretaker government, the election commission could not or did not function during the political party government. This is one example. And that became a big issue in Bangladesh that changed the entire political edifice in Bangladesh. The writer, however, describes the function and holding of mainly four caretaker government, including the Sashabuddin's elections. Obviously, those elections were free and fair and credible, as by the voters and by the international observers. But interestingly, there were 5 or 6 election commissions during that period.
Perhaps.
We are bold over my word.
Mr. Eminur, perhaps? Anybody else? Asif Munir? Rashna Imam? Alright, so if anybody's got any questions or the doctors who are here, they must be thinking, oh my God, we do so much more work, better work than these lawyers who just talk unendingly, while we save lives. Mr. Nurul Huda? Anybody else? All right, if that's the case, people must be starting.
Chapter. Without giving too much away, the author confided in me that chapter 2 presented the greatest of challenges for her to conceive and to construct. You can well imagine what it did for me over the last 48 hours to deconstruct it and represent it to you within a period of 10 minutes. Two notes of caution. I will try to be, not to make any value judgments on the content of the chapter, by reason primarily of the need for me, by reason of the office that I hold, to stay within the confines of my constitutionally bound responsibilities. There is another, a more personal reason where I must seem to be presenting the contents of the chapter dispassionately, is by reason of association with someone, my father, Barrister Sayyid Ishtiaq Ahmed, who was involved deeply with the genesis of the notion of caretaker mechanism, and was had a hands-on relationship with the workings of the caretaker governments successively up until 2001. However, I will leave it to you, but more to the author, to detect areas where I am in agreement with your thesis in chapter 2. All right? So bear with me, I would finish within the next 15 minutes. And on a light-hearted note, you can all take it as an idiot's guide to chapter 2. All right? Okay, thank you very much. And at the bottom, the fourth angle are international norms of international law and norms of international human rights. These all have to come into play in understanding, in getting a holistic view of what law is. In preference, therefore, to a strictly positive-centric methodology, Kant's analysis adopts instead a culture-specific, area-specific, and religion-specific standard to better gauge the process of lawmaking and the contents, understanding the contents of law. The reader, like me, I position myself in the position of a layman here. The reader, like me, deduces from the premise, therefore, she says, A, the legal management is a pluralistic endeavor. You bring on as many actors and forces as you can into the process of management. So it has to be inclusionary, not exclusionary. And B, specific solutions are to be forged out of or emerge from specific problems. And that is where I think later on she builds on the idea of the indigenous will, the indigenous genius of the people, of which Dr. Kamal Hussain spoke of. You have a local problem, you solve it through your own genius rather than from relying on borrowed or imported concepts.